What's up, guys? Coming at you from Shenzhen as usual. I'm back on my big cups of tea, but I'm still on Anhui province. This is a Qime Hongcha. It's, I think the English name is Qime Maofeng black tea, something like that. But hold on, let me take a sip. Yeah, that's good. So I'm still on Anhui, which I mentioned to you guys is one of the most underrated provinces in China for good tea. I actually might do a video on my tea brewing process because I think it's unique. I haven't seen anybody else do this. So to brew my big cup of tea, I'll stack my brews on top of each other at increasing intervals. I don't think that's unusual, but what I'll do is I will usually use enough tea leaves where there's enough juice left in it that I can then put it in some cold water and in the fridge overnight. And then the next day with lunch or something, I'll have a cup of cold brewed tea, which turns out pretty good. So I might do a video on that eventually. Regarding videos, yesterday you saw I didn't do a vlog entry, but I did do a time lapse. I was pretty happy with how it turned out. I didn't know when I set it up that I would see the moon come up. I would see the International Space Station, which I think that's what it was at the 33-second mark, fly by, and I would see the sun come up all in the same spot. So it worked out. I would like to pretend that that was all planned. It would seem way more brilliant, but it wasn't. I was like, wow, when I looked at it the next day. There's a few things, that's literally the second time lapse I've done. There's a few things I need to tweak with it the next time around, but I was pretty happy with how it turned out. So what am I going to talk about today? I think it's going to be a little bit more random. I haven't really thought about it before I turn this video on. What I will mention is there's a lot more fake news coming out. They're really upping their game and they're really going low now. And you know I'm in this probably a little bit of a bubble on Twitter where I'm seeing the worst of the worst. But some of these things are really gaining a lot of traction. So there was this one picture that got like 1,000 retweets. It was a picture of people lying down in the streets, and the caption was that it's in Wuhan and that people are dying in the streets. What it actually was, in actuality, was a demonstration in Germany to remember victims of a particular Nazi death camp or whatever it was. I think it was in Frankfurt. And so now that's really steeping pretty low. Especially considering the history that China has. It was, as some of you may know, probably not enough people know, China was one of the first countries in the world to open its border to Jewish refugees escaping Germany. And I mentioned that my friend's son even wrote a book on it, and I want to get him on a video eventually. But they have a rich history with helping the Jewish community, and that's why it was really nice to see a couple of guys from Tel Aviv donate a lot of stuff to China during this coronavirus outbreak on that premise, saying the Chinese community has always been here for us, so of course we're going to be here for them. And it was just this heartwarming kind of a story. And actually on that topic, because I was talking about that and I was searching stuff about it, I got recommended a video from somebody who I've already clicked multiple times, not interested of their videos, but probably Google knew I was on that topic. So they recommended a video to me by a guy named Lawai86. I've talked about him before in one of my previous videos. And so he's an American guy. He used to live in China and he lives in the US, back in the US now, and he basically craps on China on all of his videos. But there was a video I saw pop up of his that said, "Why the Chinese love Jews." That was the title of the video. And I thought, okay, hold on a second here. I'm finally gonna hear this guy mention something that is really, really good that China did. In regards to opening up its borders to Jewish refugees. No, was I wrong? So the whole video was him, like it was, I don't know, it was like 10, 15 minutes. It was him talking about how the Chinese people respect Jewish people because they have lots of money and they're good at leading and they're good at building businesses, and it's the same reason Chinese people respect Hitler. So he does this whole video on the Chinese-Jewish relationship. He even mentions Hitler specifically, and he doesn't mention one time that China did this great thing before many other countries even considered opening their borders. And it's just like, what the heck? And this is what just makes me so angry about these guys' videos. But, you know, I don't want to, I'm going back and forth whether I'll talk about some of them or not. I did see there's another YouTuber named Nathan Rich, and he just tears him apart and just exposes him for what he is. So I think maybe I'll leave that over to channels like that to handle. But this is the kind of stuff that you see from them. And in regards to fake news, there was, well, before I get to it, there's something interesting that happened that the US government did. But I'll mention one of my kind of curiosities that I've always had. One of the, there's a helicopter going by. This is the third or fourth It's the third or fourth helicopter I've heard go by heading over to Hong Kong or to the oil platforms out in the ocean. But anyways, yeah, one of my big curiosities I always had was why China didn't do a better job of countering some of this fake news and this kind of biased news about about what's happening in China. Not from these little YouTubers, they probably don't care about that, but the mass media stuff, the ones that really people accept as fact, like for example the stuff that goes on in Xinjiang with Uyghurs. You know, I know people here who are Muslim ethnic minorities. Their kids go to the local mosque to learn Arabic. There's 25,000 mosques in China. There's 10 Islamic colleges. They were never subject to the one-child policy. They have lower entry requirements to universities. Their populations, because they weren't subject to the one-child policy, was outgrowing Han Chinese percentage-wise. And it's like, if it would be so easy to counter this narrative that there's an ethnic cleansing going on here, when actually it's a kind of an affirmative action that would put affirmative action plans in any Western country to shame. And I always thought, why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they coming back and giving their side of the story, particularly when it comes to terrorism? Because in regards to the re-education camps, which they do exist for Muslim extremists, but the foreign narrative, the overseas narrative was a lot, it surrounded the idea that China was overplaying its terrorism problem, that it wasn't really as bad as they thought, and it's just an excuse to round up people who are Muslims. And so what they did was, initially they censored a lot of those terrorist attacks. And when they censored those terrorist attacks, it did something where it helped prevent an even bigger backlash from the Han Chinese population. There was a backlash to a certain degree, but it would have been so much worse if they released these videos of Muslim extremists slicing people up in subways, even though they weren't only slicing up Han Chinese, you know, or running over or targeting Han Chinese. They basically were killing anybody in range, including other Uyghurs. And so by censoring it, they protected the community. Whether you agree with censorship or not, hold on a second, there's a truck going by here now. They've got these fire trucks going around with a speaker telling people not to go out if they don't need to, wash their hands and all this kind of stuff. I actually filmed one of these yesterday. I'll pop a video in here. Yeah, so that was yesterday. All right, that took me completely off of track. So yeah, censorship. They used it in a way to protect its people in that instance. And it's an easy case to make, because if you look at what happened after 9/11, of course, they're not going to censor the 9/11 attacks on the actual buildings, but the media was free to report it however they wanted. And then there was a huge spike in attacks against Muslims in North America. In fact, even somebody who was mistaken as a Muslim, a Sikh guy, was killed because they thought he was a Muslim. You know, mosques were burnt down, and you had this backlash. So they didn't have as much of that in China. But now what they've done is, years later, through their CGTN outlet on YouTube and through these places, they've started to tell their side of the story. They started to say, okay guys, you want to see what's happening? And in many cases, you know, people are going to believe what they want to believe. There's a lot of medical stories, even with science, that kind of proves that point. There's a story I like to tell, and I mentioned this in an interview that I had a few weeks ago. I don't even know if it went live. I don't think it did. But I liken what China did to, and I emphasize the story of people believing what they want to believe, with a doctor, an Australian doctor, who discovered that stomach ulcers weren't actually caused by stomach acid like previously thought. It was caused by bacteria. Hold on, let me find his name. Barry Marshall, I believe it was. Dr. Barry Marshall. Nobody wanted to believe him. So what he did was he mixed a cocktail of bacteria, he swallowed it, gave himself stomach ulcers, and then cured himself with antibiotics. And I think he went on to win a Nobel Peace Prize, if I remember correctly. And then finally people believed him. So with China releasing these videos that they censored to protect their own people also, while they were trying to kind of fix this terrorism problem, I feel like it was their equivalent of swallowing this bacterial cocktail that they've mixed, putting themselves at risk to say to everybody, here, finally. And I don't think a lot of people paid attention to it. I'm going to put the videos in the links of the documentaries they released about terrorism in China. But it was starting to look a little bit more high quality. It was starting to be something of a level that could actually counteract the propaganda that's coming from overseas, funded by foreign governments. So what did we see happen now? The U.S. government, I don't know if it was today or yesterday, they announced a new requirement for all Chinese media to register like they're an embassy. They have to register all their employees, their assets, their property, and basically making it very hard for them to continue operating from within America. Now, granted, if Trump had the opportunity to do that with left news networks, left-leaning news networks, NBC or whatever it is, he probably would do it. But because they're doing this and finding a way to make it hard for media to report, but because it's Chinese media, nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to say, well, hold on a second, how are we going to get their response? How are we going to hear the other side of the story? Why are you making it difficult for us to hear their response? Nobody's going to say that. Dan Cohen actually took it a step further, and he said when China retaliates and they do the same thing, they have the same requirements for VOA, Voice of America, or RFA, Radio Free Asia, the U.S. state-sponsored media outlets in China, and put the same requirements on them, then people are going to care. They're going to be like, look at this, China affecting journalistic freedoms again and all this stuff. But this particular story probably isn't going to get much headway. So it was interesting to see that finally China's speaking up, and there are measures to go in place to make sure it's the foreign propaganda that still gets the majority of kind of airtime on the airwaves out there. There was, of course, at the same time, there was some new, I think there were new leaked documents about Xinjiang, and more kind of stories of these camps. And it was verified by, oh, hold on a second. Let me tell you. I got to pull it up here. It was verified by an organization called the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation in Washington, D.C. It's like, this is the same organization that they use, there's Ben Norton actually uncovered it. They continue to use debunked and fake statistics from a book called The Black Book of Communism, which considers fascist Nazi collaborators who massacred Jews in the Holocaust to be victims. And so here we are, just trusting them on this again. And it's every time you see these documents come out, or you hear this kind of stuff come out, and you look at the sources, it's like you got to just shake your head. When the last set of documents came out, I remember listening to a podcast with one of the journalists, and they were mentioning that their content, their sources were overseas Uyghur groups. And we've seen what these overseas Uyghur groups have done before, like the World Uyghur Congress, which is mostly funded by the U.S. government, saying things like where the million number comes from. I'll actually put that video in here.
At the ceremony, I met Omer Kanat, chairman of the World Uyghur Congress, a group funded almost entirely by the NED.
The Chinese authorities, Chinese government put more than 1 million Uyghurs in so-called re-education camp. It is very similar to concentration camp.
How do you know it's 1 million, the number? That's a very staggering number.
Yeah, staggering number. This number was given to by some Western media estimates. We don't know exactly how.
Western media estimates.
So yeah, basically the media gets their information from the World Uyghur Congress, and the World Uyghur Congress gets their information from the media. It's this infinite circle with no actual source. And these groups have been shown over and over again to use kind of misinformation, lies, including the Uyghur groups, and people are just still taking it for fact. So that was the new document that came out, and there were a bunch of other, there were a bunch of other things I saw. It really seems like these last few days, the kind of fake news and the anti-China stuff has really upped its game. I think, with this coronavirus going on, it's a, kick them while they're down kind of a thing, kind of a strategy that's going on. But let me see if there were some other ones I wanted to mention. I think in terms of other, I always miss a few things in the end, but I think that's it. I think that's all I wanted to talk about. In terms of the coronavirus situation, it's, numbers are still starting to look better and better outside of Hubei province. Hopefully we can keep it up. There was some news about a new malaria drug not a new malaria drug, an old malaria drug that's used to prevent malaria or treat malaria that's having some really good results. I'll put the link in the description. And I don't think there's really anything else to mention other than that. There's a few other things going at home, but I'll probably save that for another video. This one's gone on a bit too long. So with that said, guys, stay safe, take all the precautions you should be taking during this time, and I will catch you in the next video.